Why did you not have that approach to the election, Mr. Trudeau? We're in the fourth wave. Everything in the recovery relates to getting out of the pandemic first.
Why didn't we work
Mr. Blanchet, I'm going to let Mr. Blanchet in.
The final leaders debate, did they land a punch? Were they successful? Were there any real obvious winners? Well, I think the biggest loser was anybody watching it. The debate format was a bit of a mess.
And you leaders, you've agreed to tonight's rules and format. So before we begin, please answer the questions you're asked. Do not interrupt each other. I don't want to cut you off, but I will if I have to, okay?
The moderator kept injecting themselves. There was a bit of an attitude and a bit of an edge from the journalists that were presenting the questions.
Here, let's try and get some answers this time, shall we?
So Warren Kinsella is with me, who is quite familiar with preparing leaders for such debates. It's a bit of war room strategy, bit of batches burning questions. Warren, your big takeaway from what should have been the most watched debate before Election Day?
I totally agree that the format was terrible. The moderator wasn't very experienced, and there was a lot of overtalk and so on. So I wouldn't be surprised to hear that viewers were turning off, around the midway point. However, the main point is that Justin Trudeau needed to bring his best game, and he didn't. Trudeau's been falling behind in polls throughout this campaign. O'Toole has been leading. Trudeau really needed to have a top-notch performance last night, and he didn't.
Of course, we know that all four of the other party leaders are all pouncing on Justin Trudeau. They all want his job. But it was probably the Green Party leader, Annamie Paul, that landed, shall we say, the best punches. Have a look.
I have said before, and I'll say again tonight, that I do not believe that Mr. Trudeau is a real feminist. A feminist doesn't continue to push strong women out of his party when they are just seeking to serve. And I will say their names tonight and thank them. Thank you, Jane Philpott. Thank you, Jody Wilson-Raybould. Thank you, Selena Cesar-Chavez. And I'm here tonight thanks to the work that you have done.
Warren, my big takeaway from Annamie Paul's performance of the Green Party was not only has her own party been completely misguided in trying to oust her, but she performed very well, was articulate, was thoughtful, and actually invoked the three names that probably scared Justin Trudeau the most.
Yeah, Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott and Selena Chavez. You could see it on Trudeau's face. And that's the thing about debates. I always encourage people, watch it with the sound off, right? Because TV is about pictures, as you know better than anybody. It's about the visuals. And the visuals you would see last night is O'Toole looking calm and cool and confident. You'd see Blanchet, occupying the screen, doing okay, Singh much more animated than he'd been in the French debates. And Paul, like somebody, she's not a professional politician, unlike the others, and she was so good. But the visual of Trudeau was a guy who was red in the face, looking a little sweaty, gasping for air, speaking too quickly, and he looked angry. He looked like he was auditioning for the job of an opposition leader and not prime minister.
Well, he may very well be in that position after the polls close on September 20th. But one of the other sort of standout moments was when Justin Trudeau decided to, in response to the very real and grave situation of our two Michaels that are imprisoned in China unjustly, he likened it to throwing tomatoes. Have a look.
And you've let the Michaels down, and we have to get serious with China.
If you want to let the Michaels and get the Michaels home, you do not simply lob tomatoes across the Pacific. That is what Mr. Harper tried for a number of years and didn't get anywhere.
Warren, I know that when the war rooms and the strategists are with their leaders, they have jotted down some opportunities for them to get a good punch in or even get that one good line. The "you had a choice, sir" moment, of course, of when Brian Mulroney said that many years ago. But throwing tomatoes seems too glib.
And also weak. I mean, the whole term of Justin Trudeau as prime minister has been one of kowtowing to the Chinese dictatorship. In fact, he started his leadership paying tribute to that dictatorship. And from the breaking of the CanSino deal for vaccines to the unjust imprisonment of 2 Canadian citizens, like it's just been failure after failure. And I think that exchange that you highlighted really showed that last night, that Trudeau, is not strong enough to deal with the Chinese dictatorship, and we need a prime minister who is.
There has been so much that has dominated the headlines, not the election, and of course the situation in Afghanistan. And we were certainly shocked to see that foreign affairs, foreign policy was not going to be a central part to this debate. But fortunately, Erin O'Toole was able to get some of that information in, trying to hold Justin Trudeau's Liberal government to account for their many failures when it comes to not only the 2 Michaels, but what happened in Afghanistan, the extraction of Canadians, and a whole host of other foreign policy failures. But where Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, also needed to shore up some of his support, though I would argue he didn't lose much ground, he really didn't gain much. But this one line out of the debate really seemed to make him shine. Have a look.
The calls to justice are out there, and you haven't acted on them. And I meant it when I said you can't take a knee one day if you're going to take Indigenous kids to court the next.
As we all know, of course, Warren, with the discovery of the unmarked graves and more to come, the lack of work, lack of achievements that we've seen with respect to truth and reconciliation, particularly as we come up on the day of truth and reconciliation. The Trudeau Liberals have a dismal record. And frankly, it's not just Justin Trudeau, it's successive governments before that. But Justin Trudeau has always fashioned himself to be, the great healer. He's the great feminist. He is the one that's going to act. His government has done very little. Particularly, he brought up the boil water advisories. It's been a very sad, dismal state of affairs on reserves across this country. But on what Jagmeet Singh said to him with respect to taking a knee and then taking them to court, Trudeau, as you just saw, of course, quibbled with that and said that's just false.
Mr. Singh,
That's
you
not gonna
love
make things
that
better.
line about taking Indigenous
not a
kids to
line.
court.
Oh.
It's
You are.
actually not true.
So let's fact check that, Warren.
Well, what it is about, what Singh was referring to, is a case was brought, an action was brought, a human rights action on behalf of Indigenous children, arguing that they've been discriminated against in different ways in terms of obtaining program support, and they won. And Trudeau has spent a fortune on lawyers fighting that decision. And it's consistent, as you point out, with all of his treatment of Indigenous issues, from his failure to end the boil water advisories to, saying to a young woman from Grassy Narrows, thanks for your donation. And then most fundamentally, the way he treated the most senior Indigenous person in the history of Canadian government, Jody Wilson-Raybould. All that she was seeking to do was obey the law. And he insisted that she do not. In my view, he obstructed justice and drove her out. So his role, his record on Indigenous issues has been one of failure, and Singh was right to say so.
Let's look forward to the last just week and a half of the campaign. We know that there's going to be a lot more negative from the Liberals, maybe some positive from the Conservatives if they're feeling they're in good shape. What should we be looking for?
Well, Trudeau's at a runway. There's no more debates to be had. There's no more scrums, with the other leaders after the debates. Really, it comes down to the advertising and the on-the-ground campaigning. Campaigning on the ground during a pandemic is pretty tough to do. That's why I thought O'Toole was smart to move a lot of his campaign into a TV studio in Ottawa, where he's well lit and looks great and sounds great, whereas Trudeau has looked kind of sweaty and frantic, and he's got hecklers yelling at him and so on. So I think all that the Liberal war room can do at this point is go negative and go negative hard. And I think we're going to see more stuff on vaccinations, more stuff on guns, more this theme that they've developed for O'Toole, which is taking Canada backward. It hasn't worked yet, but I think that's all that they've got left.
And we'll also have to count how many times Justin Trudeau invokes Stephen Harper's name on the rest of this campaign. Well, if you live in Ontario or you live in Quebec, pretty good chance that the leaders will be in your backyard as that is really where a majority or minority is won or lost. Log on to Facebook and Twitter. Let us know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.